Government Orders of the Day numbers 1 and 2.
Child Poverty Reduction Bill, third reading. Children's Amendment Bill, third reading.
The Right Honourable Jacinda Ardern.
Mr Speaker, I move that the Child Poverty Reduction Bill and the Children's Amendment Bill be now read a third time.
Order. I call Jacinda Ardern, and I'm going to admonish Mr King, who is exceptionally rude and somewhat noisy.
Mr Speaker.
The Right Honourable Jacinda Ardern will start again.
Mr Speaker, I want to start with a reflection on some comments I made in this place 10 years and 2 days ago to this day. And those were actually the words that I spoke in this Parliament for the very first time. I don't often reflect on my maiden speech, but it occurred to me when thinking about my long-held desire to progress child poverty legislation, that it was in that speech that I first reflected on my motivations to be in here in Parliament. I've spoken often of some of the places that I grew up in New Zealand and the influence that that had on my social conscience. I think the way that I referred to that in my speech at the time was that my passion for social justice came from what I saw. My love of politics came when I realised that it was the key to changing what I saw, and there is so much to change. The fifth Labor government made good progress on what I believe must continue to be our focus, reducing poverty in this country. Labor lifted 130,000 children out of poverty through working for families, but that does not mean that many do not remain there still. I will not pretend that the response is simple. It is not. These children are not part of an underclass, as I've heard them called. They are part of our community, and we have a responsibility to continue the momentum of the previous Labor government and to finally rid ourselves of poverty in Aotearoa, New Zealand. This is our collective challenge. You know, Mr Speaker, when I think about it, the reference to a collective challenge is one of the things that I feel most proud of, because in this House today, we are not doing this on our own. This is no longer just an initiative of the Labor Party, although I'm very proud of the role that we have played. This is now an initiative that has been led by a coalition government with the support of New Zealand First and the Green Party. And it also is an initiative that has had the support of the National Party. I want to acknowledge that. This is this Parliament's collective challenge. And the groups that have come together in Parliament today to support it in this House means that it will have an enduring legacy, unless by some shock of nature the ACT Party's vote grows beyond 1. So, Mr Speaker, it is a collective challenge and it has been collectively responded to by this House, and for that I acknowledge each and every one of you. But there are many others that I wish to thank, and that's where I want to start my speech here today, and that is with a note of thanks. I want to thank the countless individuals, organisations, researchers and academics who have worked tirelessly on the issue of child poverty and child wellbeing over a number of years. I want to thank and reflect on the work of the Expert Advisory Group on Child Poverty. It was established by the Children's Commissioner at the time, Dr Russell Wills, and it was chaired by Jonathan Boston and Tracy McIntosh. Now, they shifted the debate and brought focus and rigour to this issue. They were the first who drew on the child poverty legislation of the United Kingdom and Wales and proposed that we take a hybrid here in New Zealand. John Hancock, as I understand it, was one of the people who drafted the first chapter that suggested that the bill that we will essentially pass in this House today should be constructed. And John, wherever you are right now, I acknowledge your work and the role you have played in getting us here today. I also want to acknowledge a very special man to this place, to MSD, to Parliament and all ministers who have ever engaged with him, Brian Perry. No one knows numbers like Brian. He has been critical in making sure that we have produced a robust document here that does what it attempts to do, and that is to hold ourselves to account. I also want to acknowledge the current Commissioner for Children, Judge Andrew Beecroft, for his enduring commitment to improving the lives of children. The members of the Social Services and Community Committee who worked on the bill and the more than 600 submitters and took on board the recommendations of many in making alterations to this bill. So, Mr. Speaker, what does it do? It creates a legislative framework aimed to ensure that successive governments, and with its cross-party support, I truly believe it will be successive governments, are transparent and held to account in reducing child poverty. It recognises that we must have an enduring commitment in this area if we are to see long-term systemic change, and ensures that we will have independent reporting to ensure progress is made. It sets out measures that accord with international standards and scorecards, and it does so by setting 4 primary and 6 supplementary measures against which government's performance can be judged. The 4 primary measures are made up of 2 income, 1 material hardship and 1 persistence measure. The income measures applied both before and after deducting housing costs. They will ensure that they give us adequate information to know what policies will make the biggest difference to children and their families. Successive governments, Mr. Speaker, will be required to set 3-year, intermediate and 10-year long-term targets for each of the primary measures. Governments will not be required to set targets for the supplementary measures. It is up to them how far their ambition goes. And the government statistician must, independently of ministers and government, report annually on the rates of child poverty against all those measures. Significantly, Mr. Speaker, the legislation amends the Public Finance Act. I knew I would get my way in there somehow. So that on budget day, the government reports on its progress towards reducing child poverty and how the budget contributes to that goal. It also establishes a dedicated child wellbeing strategy, which requires governments to make a commitment to ensure that all of New Zealand's children can thrive, and that we fulfil this government's goal of being the best place in the world to be a child. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to underestimate the power and importance of the child wellbeing strategy. Measuring poverty is one thing. Setting goals to reduce poverty is another. But making sure that we have an action plan that captures the voice of children is critical. And we have undertaken to engage children in that process, and we're undertaking that work now. And I acknowledge the Child Wellbeing Unit and the Child Poverty Unit for the work that they are doing out of DPMC alongside Oranga Tamariki and the Minister for Children. Here is just a small handful of some of the postcards that have been written directly to me as part of that process. And Mr. Speaker, yes, I am reading every single one of them, and the message that they send is really clear. They are concerned about everything to do from mental health and well-being of their peers to whether or not their peers have enough food to eat, enough money in the household to thrive, to participate, to feel like they're making the most of their talents and their opportunities. And from time to time, they send me their Instagram handle as well and ask for a cheeky follow. But either way, Mr. Speaker, this is capturing the voices of children, and it is critical to the work that we do. This legislation is pioneering. It is unashamedly bold. And we have already, alongside that, I think, set bold targets, 10-year targets that will essentially halve the rate of child poverty in New Zealand. These will be ambitious targets to meet. But if we are successful, it will place us amongst some of the lowest levels of child poverty amongst countries that we would compare ourselves to. But more importantly than that, it will make a substantial difference to the lives of children and their families. We've already started. The Families Package, $5.5 billion of investment, means that over 380,000 families, once fully rolled out, will be, on average, $75 a week better off. The winter energy payment, over 700,000 people, many of whom will be on low incomes and have children, will benefit. Free doctors' visits for under 14s, thanks to New Zealand First. The mental health strategies we've been rolling out for under 25s, thanks to the Green Party. Nurses in schools, which we put in last budget. Making sure housing standards are lifted so that children are warm and dry in their homes, and making sure that we increase the number of state and public housing for those who need it most. Ultimately, Mr. Speaker, we are focused on making sure that we can stand proudly and say we're a government that cares for the most vulnerable. But Who better to sum up why we do work like this than someone like Nelson Mandela? He said, "Overcoming poverty is not a gesture of charity, it is an act of justice." Thank you to everyone who's been involved in what I ultimately see as an act of justice. Kia ora koutou katoa.
The question is that the motion is agreed to. The Honourable Alfred Nara.
Mr. Speaker, New Zealand